The big thing here is child abuse, but let's start with infant deprivation, which just means you're not spending quality time with your kid. Uh, Typically, this is associated with mothers who don't spend time with their children, no physical contact, no interaction will lead to poor languages, lack of trust because you're not spending any time with, your basic caregiver, and just a bad job in terms of social understandings, like how you're supposed to deal with affection and stuff. So, oh, the key thing here is greater than 6 months will lead to irreversible changes. You have to think of like feral children, growing up in the jungle, raised by wolves. If you've got 6 months of no real, um, you know, parent and child interaction, you're kind of lost. And of course, severe deprivation, if you're not paying attention to your kid, you're not feeding them, you're not, there when they're bumping into stuff, can lead to death. Child abuse, physical, sexual, and emotional. Physical abuse, wounds, fractures, things in different stages of healing. If you're in a car crash and you get hit, your clavicle's going to break, your femur's going to break, and they're all going to be in a similar stage of healing. But if you go to the doctor, 1 month and you've got a broken clavicle, and he notices that, oh, it looks like about a month ago you also broke your other clavicle, or maybe a couple months ago your femur was all messed up, and now it's still recovering from that. High index of suspicion for physical abuse, you have to call Child Protective Services. Child Protective Services is another thing that's high yield. You always call them over the police unless it's like a police emergency. I highlighted here shaken baby syndrome. Retinal hemorrhages is the big thing that they'll quiz you on, in addition to subdural hematomas. What they don't tell you is symmetrical burns. If you're dumping your kid in very hot, scalding water, they'll, of course, retract their legs, and you'll end up having symmetrical burns on their butt cheeks and on their inner thighs. If you just dunk them in with their feet, then symmetrically, bilaterally, their feet will be burned in similar ways. Sexual abuse. So, of course, if they have any sort of sexually transmitted or UTIs, then you have to have a high index of suspicion for sexual abuse. If a 4-year-old girl comes in and she has burning with urination, and kind of look at what's going on, and you have, all this trauma around the vagina, you have to think, well, maybe someone's trying to get in there when they shouldn't. And yeah, if if it turns out that they have a cherry red cervix, same thing. And of course, you have to look for also anal trauma, even though that's not like the first thing you would think of. Still do it. And here's the big kicker: if a kid in your child's 4-year-old class is going around trying to give other students oral sex, then you should be thinking that this child is sexually abused at home or somewhere. Emotional abuse, not as big of a deal as the other ones immediately, but still a big deal. Overly affectionate with less familiar adults. They're not getting it at home, they try and find it with someone else. Child neglect. You still have to report it. And again, CPS, not to the police. Well, how can you child neglect? Well, maybe their clothes are always messed up. Maybe they're never washed. Maybe poor nutrition, failure to thrive, bad dentition. And vulnerable child syndrome isn't really high yield. It's just important to know. Usually something happens to the kid, and he gets a super bad case of the flu, ends up in the hospital when he's like 7 or 8 or something, and then for the rest of this kid's, young life, the parents are always, they're bundling him up for school in like 6 layers, and they're always, walking him to school events, and they're always there. Oh, is he okay? Are you okay? Richard, is everything okay? Stuff like that. Kids will make fun of you